Pragya, you need to give me like permission.
Okay, wait, wait. Yeah, got it.
Hmm. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, today we have Kanav Sehgal who very graciously agreed to join us and answer a few questions. As we all know, Wabi Sabi focuses on mental health, and hence we thought it would be fitting to talk a bit about mental health and other issues in the LGBTQ communities this month. So, thank you so much for being here today. Can you introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Kanav Sehgal. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently a mid-career master's student at Azim Premji University, Bangalore, where I'm pursuing my master's in development. And I've also worked in the corporate sector and the not-for-profit sector in the past, and I'll be starting a new role very soon in the social sector.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So, we'll proceed with the questions. So, why do you think Pride Month is necessary? Um,
Yeah. So I think Pride Month is necessary because we don't have an option or an ability to celebrate Pride in the other 11 months of the year. So the idea of Pride Month started in the United States with the Stonewall riots and has now morphed into a global movement. And it's important for us to remember that there was a time even in India where it was a crime to be homosexual, and there are many people even in India today who go through these struggles, and in some parts of the world it is still a crime to belong to the LGBTQ community. So the entire world does not celebrate Pride Month. It's only a few parts of the world that do, and it's important to remember that if it's just 1 month of the year that is used to celebrate the LGBTQ community, I think that's great. But I think the goal should be to ensure that every day of every year is a day that one could be proud of for being part of the LGBTQ community as well.
yes. So, what are some of the bizarre myths or false information that you've gotten relating to this? Like, and how is reality different from such uh, false informations?
So there are many false myths, and some of these myths were very prevalent when the debates about homosexuality and transgender rights were happening in the courts. One myth that I've heard is that if you give the LGBTQ community equal rights, you will somehow destroy the institution of marriage and family. That is absolutely false, because from history, we've learned that family and social institutions have always changed, and that various communities have always been marginalized. For example, in India, there was a time when widow remarriage was not allowed. We had sati that was very commonly used. It was a practice that was very common, and divorce was and also still is very stigmatized. Live-in relationships were and still are not acceptable in Indian society, and so there's this notion that by allowing people to live freely as gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual people, that you're somehow destroying the institution of family and marriage. That's one. Another misconception is that it is a sin. But then there are many people who've argued that even though some religious scriptures do make very, very vague allusions to homosexuality being a sin or being against religion, there are many people who would argue that God made us this way, and to love each other is what God would have wanted. So that argument also falls flat. And the third argument that I've heard, misconception, is that by supporting homosexuals, you are somehow supporting pedophilia and bestiality, which is basically a relationship between a man and an animal. And that's absolutely absurd, because in a same-sex relationship, it's the same as a heterosexual relationship. There are two consenting adults who are in a consensual relationship. It's not the same as a man having sex with a child or a man having sex with an animal. It's like comparing another human being with a child or an animal, which is absolutely wrong. So these are just some misconceptions that I've heard and that I wanted to clarify.
Yes, that is very true. So,
Okay, so my question to you is, what are some of the challenges that the LGBTQ people face when they try to access mental help in the Department of Mental Health?
Yeah, so there are many challenges that the LGBTQ community faces when they try to access mental health. I think the biggest challenge is, who do you talk to? and how do you access this kind of help? Because for many people, if you are an LGBTQ person, you're most likely the only person in your family who belongs to the community. So you cannot even ask your parents, because if you tell your parents, you might face ostracization and might even be might face violence. And so from there, who do you talk to? If you tell your friends that you're part of the community, you might also face rejection. So there are therapists out there now, and now because of COVID, some therapists are also offering their services online. But again, it's a big question of who do you trust? How do you find these therapists? Are they actually queer affirmative? These are all questions to ask. And another big issue is that of money. Therapy costs money. How many people have access to that kind of money? So there are all of these problems that people face in India. And I just want to quickly end by saying that in India, it is still not a crime to convert, and I'm using this very saying this in inverted quotations, to convert people who are part of the LGBTQ community. And there are some psychologists who call themselves psychologists and claim to have a quote unquote cure for homosexuality. This is a completely false fact, and something that we need to challenge as well.
So, Kanav, as you said a few minutes ago, that parents have problem accepting the fact that their child can be from the LGBTQ community. So, what do you want to say to them, the parents who nurture thoughts such as, it's a mental problem, or falling in love with the same sex, it's a crime? So, what do you want to convey to them?
Yeah, what I would like to convey to them is that it is no longer a crime in India. It was a crime, very wrongly so, in our country. And the reason it was a crime was because our statute books just did not reflect the changes in society. And secondly, it is not a mental disorder either. It was listed, homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder many years ago. Once again, it was a mistake that psychologists themselves came forward and said, apologized for. I think with parents, the reason why parents do not accept their children is because of what I would call the log kya kahenge syndrome. Most parents are too worried about what their relatives would say. And I think parents need to understand that you have to put your child's uh, individuality first, and you need to accept them as for who they are. There's plenty of literature available out there even in regional languages. So it's not so hard to educate yourself on this issue, and to understand that if you are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, whatever, there are people in India who belong to that community who are now finally living a freer life. So if you're a parent and you want your child to be happy, to grow in their career, to just be a wholesome human being, you would want them to live life the way they are, not force them to live a fake life. And I think no parent would want their child to live like this. But for this, parents need to educate themselves, which unfortunately many parents in India still haven't.
Thank you for enlightening us on that, Kanav.
So, since you talked about how parents should support people, like their child who are in the LGBTQ, so are you seeing progress in breaking through the stigma around seeking mental health support?
Yeah, I think I am seeing progress, but it's very restricted to people who belong to elite privileged backgrounds. So, in cities, for example, people who live in Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, Bangalore, metro cities, I am seeing parents who have the social capital and the cultural capital and the awareness about LGBTQ identities to accept their children. You have people who are out and proud. You have some gay celebrities who openly talk about their relationships, and parents are okay with it. But this is restricted to these very, very limited privileged spaces. If you go to rural parts of the country, you go to small towns, even in cities, if you talk to people who do not have that privilege and you ask them, and by them I mean the LGBTQ people, they will tell you the same story, that I cannot tell my parents because they just won't understand. So I think, yes, there is change and progress, but it's restricted to only a few set of people as of now.
So, it is proved that people in the LGBTQ community are twice as likely to have a mental disorder and are 5 times as likely as straight or cisgendered people to have attempted suicide. So clearly, we have made progress, but we still have a long way to go. So can you please give your views on that?
Yeah, I think the statistics speak for themselves, and I think one of the reasons why people from the LGBTQ community face such a high rate of mental health issues is precisely because they face rejection from multiple aspects, multiple institutions in society. from their own family, from friends, from the religious community, from the government, from the legal system, from the healthcare system, from the mental health care system, even educational institutions. How many educational institutions actually teach children about sex and sexuality? Most of the people who I've spoken to from the community experience bullying while they were at school. And I'm talking about people who went to school maybe 10 years ago. I'm not sure if the situation has changed right now, but I'm not sure whether it has changed very much either, because I do not believe that sex and sexuality is still a part of our curriculum. And even if it has changed in schools, has it changed in the rural and smaller schools in smaller towns as well? So I think the reason for this high rate of suicide, depression is because you feel alone and isolated, and you don't know who to go to and talk to for help. Yes, the internet does exist as a space to interact with other people from the community, but connecting with people on the internet is also a matter of privilege. Not everyone has access to the internet, and not everybody knows who they can trust and who they can't. And so I think that it's unfortunate, but this is just a harsh reality that people from the community do face higher rates of mental health issues, and it's something that we also need to speak about more.
Yes, that was very interesting. So, in recent times, like India is still working out her take on accepting LGBTQ, as we can see from the verdict from the Supreme Court. So, why do you think this is so?
I think the reason is because times have changed, and now I think people have also realized that if you look at other parts of the world, mostly the Western world, this battle has been fought for years. The United States, for example, legalized same-sex marriage in 2015. In India, we are now discussing same-sex marriage also, but I think it's taking us way too long. In Taiwan, same-sex relationships were legalized a few years ago also, and I believe Malaysia is also on its path to legalize same-sex marriage. So I think this debate about homosexuality and about same-sex marriage and about transgender rights is being fought in many parts of the world, and people are realizing that it's just wrong to criminalize an entire set of people. It also makes no sense, because if you call yourself a country that claims to represent its people, how can you not represent a large section of your people who are clearly oppressed and have been oppressed for years? That being said, in India, we still face a lot of difficulties. I spoke about same-sex marriage in India. There were petitions to legalize it in the Delhi High Court. I think it was filed last year, but the central government has said that it does not support the decision because it believes that marriage is between a man and a woman. So this is again a very problematic notion that I think needs to change. Marriage should be an institution for consenting adults, not necessarily people of just one gender and one gender identity. So these challenges do exist in India, but I'm glad to see that it's changing, and I'm glad to see that more people are talking about it now.
With the term coming out, which is used when people are not from the so-called straight club. So what are your views on the term coming out? And don't you think it contradicts the idea of equality for all? And since heterosexual people do not need the field to come out, so why do you think people from the LGBTQ community need to declare the fact that they are from the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So coming out would refer to a person from the LGBTQ community declaring publicly or privately to a few people that they are a part of the community. And it is a very personal decision. Not everybody has the courage to do it. Not everyone has the ability to do it. And not everybody would want to do it. And as far as the argument about equality goes, the sad reality is that, yes, it would be great to live in a world where there would be no need for labels, where it shouldn't matter if you're gay, straight, bi, trans, or whatever, where you don't have to come out, where you just are the way you are, and that is just how it is. That is an ideal society, I think, where all of us would like to live. But unfortunately, we live in a society where there are separate laws for people who are straight and people who are LGBTQ. For example, straight people were not criminalized under Section 377. Although I do want to clarify that under 377, there were certain types of sexual activities between men and women that were also criminalized. But on the whole, if you look at it, people who are heterosexual don't have a law that criminalizes their existence. Same-sex marriages are a crime, is still not legal, but heterosexual marriages are legal. Transgender people, the third gender, was not recognized until 2015, but male and female genders have always been recognized. So the sad reality is that even today, people have to come out because they are treated differently. And it is important for people to know that, yes, I am different. I want equality, but you have to recognize that because of this difference, I'm treated differently by society, by religion, by the school, by the educational institutions, and by my parents also. And so the goal should be to live in an equal world where there would be no need to come out. But the sad truth is that right now we are just not there yet.
So yes, as you said throughout this meeting, that people from the LGBTQ community are oppressed and suppressed. So both societal pressure and parental pressure build up on them. So what do you think we can do to help our friends who are from that community, to help them cope with all of these problems around them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think being a supportive friend is very important. Most of the people who I spoke to told me that when they were in school, they were bullied by their own friends. And they were bullied because they were effeminate, or because they had a different dressing sense, or also because they just were not interested in the opposite sex. So I think one thing that anybody could do to support their friend who's from the community is to not behave in a very homophobic, transphobic manner. Is to support them when they if they're a guy, and support them when they say that they may want to dress up and put on makeup, or if they're a girl and she says that I want to cut my hair short and wear a shirt and a pant, support them, because it's important to understand that the way we express ourselves is our individual choice. It is who we are, and we should support them. And also to not be too judgmental, and not to add to the stress, but also just be a sounding board for them when they're going through a breakup. And I think that itself, just be knowing that you're somebody who you can go to, knowing that you're somebody who you can trust, is just, I think, the best thing in the world.
Okay, so as I inferred about all of this, I would like to say that people still fear to identify themselves, even though they get support sometimes, but they fear their own selves, or they fear the society, that they might get judged. And so often they don't really identify themselves, and then they live the rest of their lives with regret. So, what do you want to say to all those people who are afraid of identifying themselves?
Yeah, as I said before, coming out is a very personal choice, and unfortunately, not everyone would want to come out or can come out. And the fear is very, very understandable, because you are going against this entire world practically. Your world being your parents, friends, family, and you don't know who will support you. So, my only message to them is to just stay strong and to take your time and to find people who you think you can trust. And believe me, there are people. If not people in your school, if not people in your college, if not people in your friend circle, there might be somebody online who might be willing to help you. And now, thanks to the internet, you have support groups, you have Instagram pages, you have different groups, and even WhatsApp groups where you can join and talk to people who might be in the same boat as you. So I would just say stay strong and find people who you might think would be of help. And also, going back to that conversation about mental health therapy, it might be a good idea to talk to a therapist. Yes, it's going to be hard to find one, and it might be expensive, but that also might be a feasible option.
So this was the last question that we had. And so I would like to round it off by saying that all of your answers were really inspiring. They were crisp and brief, but they contained all the points that we wanted and all the points that viewers would need. So on that note, I would thank you a lot for joining us today. And yes, with that, we come to the end of this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm very happy to also know that both of you are very interested in this issue, and so is are the rest of you. And I'm glad that this issue is being spoken about, and I'm glad that all of you are using Pride Month to talk about this. And I hope that all the people listening in also find this conversation useful. And I hope it goes a long way in spreading more awareness on all of these issues that we spoke about. So thank you so much. It was a great pleasure talking to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot again, Kanav.